Okay, folks, welcome to my latest installment of Reviewing the Future. We will be covering chapters 1 and 2 today. And if you don't recall, The Future is one of the latest novels by Stefan Molyneux. Stefan Molyneux is an Irish born Canadian anarcho capitalist podcaster who promotes philosophy, non aggressive parenting, stateless societies, and hard boiled scientific empiricism. That's the Wikipedia entry because the Wikipedia entry is a sheer hit piece. Now, you can find Stefan Molyneux online at any of these links, but I suggest you try out freedomain.locals.com for $5 a month. You can have access to all of his free novels, including his magnum opus, The Future, which is to Stefan Molyneux what Atlas Shrugged is to Ayn Rand. Now, the recap of the prologue is as follows, and there will be spoilers for the prologue and chapters 1 and 2 in this video and a little bit further on. 95% of humanity has perished in a 4 centuries long war. A group of men emerge from a mountain cave with boxes in tow. As a satellite laser rains death from above, the doomed men unleash the contents of the boxes, tiny weaponized drones. The men all die, even their names are lost, but their drones survive to destroy the satellites and pave the way for mankind's utopian future. Now, the big problem with this prologue is that it reads like a creation myth. It undermines the idea that the future presented in the book is something attainable, and that's important because in the book description that's on his website, it says that Stefan Molyneux vividly describes the wonderful future that mankind can achieve and the barriers to getting there and all that we need to leave behind to finally live in peace. I mean, basically, he's setting up this future world as a possible utopia that we can all partake in. And to give it a creation myth type of origin just makes it seem like it's something mythological as opposed to something that's actually attainable. So my suggestion was drop the prologue altogether and just start the book where it needs to start. Now, you might think that that is chapter 1. I will be making the argument later that that's not the case. But let's get into chapter 1 and figure out what it is, or how it is that the book actually starts. So chapter 1, to basically recapitulate what chapter 1 is, a man gradually rises from sleep to wakefulness through a stream of consciousness recollection of his life, especially formative relationships and events. This recollection of his goes all the way back to his infancy. He talks about how he remembers how the sunlight used to fall on his baby legs. Early childhood shows an inattentive mother and a demanding father in his life. His father's attitude is basically win at all costs. Second place is shameful. It's nothing. It's visible. So that's kind of his basic childhood background. And there is a friend whom he encounters in college. Now, I say this is a friend. When I went back and read through it a second time, I realized that there may have actually been 2 friends whom I'm amalgamating here. But both of those friends are roughly based on Stefan Molyneux himself. Interested in Ayn Rand and objectivism, and as Molyneux was in his youth, and he espouses some of the things that Molyneux himself says, such as, he believes that the earliest memories of childhood must be dug out and made conscious. That's so that you can grapple with your childhood or your earliest childhood traumas. True memories, however, must be distinguished from parents' self-serving falsehoods. Sometimes our parents have the potential to rewrite history to make themselves look good. So what we may think are our memories may just be the stories that our parents told us all this time. You know, did I really set the couch on fire when I was 6, or is that just something that mom did to cover up her drunkenness? You know, that kind of thing. Now, here's a disagreement that the sleeper has with the friend. How important is the past to how one feels and acts in the now? Don't the present circumstances matter more than the past? Well, the friend would argue that the past is actually more important. Now, his friend is forgotten, and that the sleeper himself could be forgotten is an idea that terrifies him. He's absolutely terrified of being forgotten. And he realizes even his parents are forgotten, and only he is around to remember them. He remembers especially an occasion where he's leafing through a book, and he sees a photograph of 2 celebrities who happen to be Ayn Rand and one of Ayn Rand's business partners, maybe a lover. And they were paired with an unidentified man. And he's thinking, oh my God, this guy's in a photograph with two celebrities. Nobody remembers who this guy is. There's nobody who can identify him. He's been completely forgotten. And the experience of having seen this photograph reinforces his own fear of being forgotten. Now, the question is, and this is something that he disagrees with his friend about, what matters more, that the world know you or that you know yourself? Now, one of the other concepts that the sleeper encounters during his waking is that memory is a fake form of immortality. He realizes this while remembering his parents and the friend because he's remembering them as he remembers them, but is that really how they were? And he realizes this is a generalized principle. People only remember you as they perceived you. They don't remember who you actually were. And consequently, your memory will be used as they see fit. You'll become whoever they need you to be. Now, the question is, if you can't survive into the future, everybody dies eventually. And if you can't be sure your accomplishments will survive into the future, you don't know what's going to happen of the work you've done. And if you can't even control how you'll be perceived in the future, assuming your memory survives at all, what's the point of life? Now, the friend's solution is that this control that you want to have over the future, whether it be your survival into the future or your accomplishments succeeding you into the future or your memory being maintained in the future, that's all kind of a form of control. But to the friend, that's not the point. The point of life is to really be yourself, be your unique self, and express yourself honestly and with integrity. Now, the sleeper has a different solution. The sleeper solution is the accumulation of power. And his foundational belief that underlies this quest for power is that human nature is incapable of changing. It's the product of evolution, and all animals pursue power and control and dominance, especially apes. His father's maxim is also that power is power. Technology might change, but people don't. Aristotle, who lived, in the times BC, he would still understand 21st century logic because people don't change. And so Aristotle's logic would apply even to people in the future. The only real victory then is reproduction. You get power, you get money, you get a pretty wife. And a pretty wife makes you more successful children. Through your children that you wind up passing on your values to the next generation, and you achieve a sort of immortality in that way. Now, a counterexample would be the feminists that the sleeper has encountered. A few of them had children, so their beliefs would just die with them. So these were people who had strong beliefs, but they had no children to carry these strong beliefs on into the future. Moreover, they wanted to bring in immigrant groups that had birth rates so high that their families, who would have no sympathy for these feminist beliefs, would be completely drowned out by the massive numbers who would be born to these groups. I mean, basically, if you take in an immigrant population to replace you, then you're basically replacing your values. You're not going to have your values. It's going to be their values, whatever they are. Now, continuing this discourse on power, one prerequisite for obtaining power is to embrace your privilege. The sleeper himself was born into privilege. I was born into everything positive and helpful to the pursuit of power that you can conceivably imagine. And this label of being privileged is something that makes people with potential handicap themselves. It's like a fetter, a chain that you try and put on these people's legs so that they can't express their full potential. They think, oh, well, I don't want to abuse my privilege, and therefore I will hold myself back rather than be everything that I can be. But just as if you're born beautiful, you don't make yourself ugly, the same thing, the same concept of having natural privilege of, a pleasant physical appearance, maybe a pleasant voice, maybe talents in some way, shape, or form, this is equally applicable to externally acquired privilege. If you have wealth or you have status, you have just as much a right to use that as you do your natural tendencies. And even people who identify as downtrodden, as not privileged, they use their downtrodden as if it were privilege. They play the victim card, and therefore everyone, just across the board, everyone should use every tool that they have. And he identifies an example of hypocrisy in his mother's behavior. His mother used her beauty, her natural privilege of a pleasant appearance, to marry a powerful man. She used her privilege to gain privilege, and then later she would chide her son for using his privilege for gain, as if he wasn't just doing exactly the same thing that she did. Now, how does power relate to others? Well, power equals status, and consequently, you never want to let yourself look ridiculous, because that is a diminishing of your status. Now, people who refuse to exercise power nevertheless expect the powerful to act on their behalf. It's like, woe is me, I don't have power, or I won't use power, and therefore I need you to use your power to act on my behalf. Now, acting on the behalf of others does raise your status, but it also lowers the status of the people whose behalf you act upon, because they're basically pronounced as weaklings by the fact that they need your help. Now, you could work to empower them, but if they are refusing to empower themselves, and instead they're using their weakness to demand things of you, why would you ever empower them? If they're this needy, if they're this much of a burden in their weakness, why in the world would you give them power? So it's best rather to empower yourself and become a memorable persona. Remember, he's terrified of being forgotten. So you should have the power to assist others, but use it to assist yourself in your own success. And that's how you really move forward. Now, the final revelations of the chapter is that the sleeper is Louis Staton, the former president of the United States. He's being brought back, basically resurrected to life from cryogenic stasis. He put himself into a cold sleep coma, or he was put into a cold sleep coma by scientists, and allowed him, and with the idea that he would be awakened hundreds of years in the future. That he is being brought back in his mind when he realizes that, hey, I'm being brought back from this cryogenic stasis. Hey, I made it, I survived. That he is being brought back means he was indeed remembered. People remembered him, and not only that, but they remembered him, and in turn, that remembrance resulted in his actually surviving into the future. He made it. He actually got there, and that means he was right. He sees his survival as a ratification of his theories about power and life's purpose, of raising his status and maximizing his success for himself. The fact that he's being resurrected to life in the future is proof that he was right about everything, and everyone else in his life was wrong, including his old friend. So with this unchanged philosophy about power, status, and success, this former president of the United States decides he's going to be a world ruler today as well. He's going to seize the new future into which he's being awakened, just as he had once seized the past. Now, chapter 2 comes in, where a man named David muses on the genre of science fiction while utilizing the kind of technology that was once prophesied by science fiction. So let's take a look at this theme of science fiction versus future science. Science fiction authors and readers were terrified by the notion that technology would end humanity someday. And you see a lot of that today with the idea of AI just suddenly taking over, or what happens if AI gets leaked out into the internet. And it's kind of chilling when you realize there is I think there's a computer program called Stuxnet, which was used by the CIA or by the Israeli counterintelligence to sabotage Iranian nuclear plants. But that Stuxnet virus is now everywhere on the internet. In fact, you probably have it on your phones and your computers, and you just don't know it because the only thing it ever does is like sabotage nuclear reactors, and specifically the Iranian ones. So it's not going to do anything, but it may be out there. What if the same thing were to happen to an AI, you wonder? And who knows, maybe that's already happened with all the advent of ChatGPT and all these other kinds of things. Maybe there's an AI on your phone now that's even now going through your browser histories and stuff. Who knows? But science fiction authors and readers were generally alarmed by our improvements in technology, and they worried that technology would bring about the end of humanity. Another good example of that is the Terminator movie. Now, what they really needed to examine, it turned out, was their own self threatening patterns. Humanity was always the issue, technology was not the issue. In the future, technology is nearly all a boon. You know, it's all something that benefits humanity. It's not something that threatens to destroy it. Humanity was more than capable of destroying itself, or nearly destroying itself. So, in this future that David inhabits, a person's consciousness can be uploaded into a new youthful body. That's one of the benefits of technology that the future has brought. Now, David's father had rejected this procedure, believing that, number one, it wouldn't really be him in the new body, it would just be a copy. And number two, being an old man in a young body would be too jarring. It would also make relationships difficult, being an old soul. I mean, what would it be like to be, 100 years old and yet have the body of a 20-year-old? And who would you actually relate to? Would you try to pick up an actual 20-year-old, or would you need to look for somebody who was 100 years old like you in the body of a 20-year-old? Now, David's uncle underwent the procedure, and his experience was similar to that. In fact, he talks about how his uncle acts as though he's still a feeble old man. He acts as though his back is sore and his knees are weak or something, but he's actually in a 20-year-old body, so it's more mental than anything else. So it's not this kind of, trying to overcome the transhumanist type movement is not something that's necessarily looked at as being something good, even though it's possible. Now, cryogenic stasis, like that which Louis Staton underwent, is also available, but this future that David inhabits is such a good world. It's such a utopia that few people envision a better future worth sleeping hundreds of years for. When you have such a good world around you now, why would you put yourself to sleep in the hope of attaining to something better? Now, on the theme of reviving the former president, David is the one overseeing the revival of Louis Staton. And as the process concludes, as Louis Staton is being revived, David ponders whether the revival is a good idea. And the reasons against reviving Louis Staton is that the future deems Staton a monster. He raised the sun who set fire to the world. So apparently Staton's son actually was the one who started off whatever cataclysmic happenings caused the war to begin, and it ended up with 95% of the human race being destroyed. Now, Staton's ethic, his philosophy that we explored in chapter 1, it's 100% opposed to that of this new society. How could he possibly fit in? If you are being brought, it's kind of like the Aldous Huxley book, Brave New World. You had a man resurrected in a kind of a not a Neanderthal, but he was like a native, a savage, somebody who was previously from a civilization that was prior to the civilization, the dystopian civilization of Brave New World. And his natural inclinations were just they were so jarring with this new world that he found himself in, that he suffered greatly from being in the new world. And the idea here is the same, that when you have Staton's ethic being one of acquiring power, and the society that he's coming into being the opposite of that, as we find out, how is he going to fit in? Is this going to be torture for him to be resurrected into this new society? And worse, what's going to happen to the society now that we're bringing this person back? What kind of influence could he potentially have? This is a guy who ruled the world once. Is he going to try to do it again? And, would he succeed? Now, the reasons for the revival is simply that having access to the mind and memories of someone who is such a notable public figure as Louis Staton, that's way too valuable an opportunity for scientists and historians to pass up. And studying him, moreover, may be the key to ensuring that humanity never nearly destructs again. Remember, humanity was almost wiped out, and his son was the prime instigator of that self-immolation. So if you study his father, maybe you'll be able to figure out some secrets and key thoughts and elements that will prevent a second apocalypse. And, on the cynical side, he can always be refrozen after having his mind uploaded for study. Maybe they're not going to keep him awake. They're just going to take his mind and put it on a computer, and then they can just basically play with it as they need to. Kind of cold, but, this is not a guy who may warrant living in a perfect world, or as perfect as he might be able to get. Now, the revelations at the end of this chapter that we have, the revelations about the world that we live in, is that this utopian future society is built on the antithesis of everything that Staten believed about power and purpose. Staten is being awakened thinking that, oh, my awakening means I was right about everything. What he's going to find out is that he was wrong about everything, and that a truly good society rejects everything that he came to conclude about power and purpose. Ironically, this means that Staten's forgotten friend was right, and in a sense, the friend is actually living on, in the sense that the friend's ideals are what the society are built on. The friend's ideas and ideals are being propagated through this continuing society. And so his friend, even though forgotten in a sense, is actually living on in a way that Staten never could. And what the friend believed was that all along, it was people's childhood trauma that resulted in their desire for power and control, resulting in social pathologies and ultimately world war. Basically, it all starts in the home. If you have a bad childhood, your lack of control in those bad childhood situations is going to convert into a desire for control in adult life. And if you cannot get the control that you want, you'll find ways to get it that are not good for society, that's going to result in social pathologies, and it's even going to expand up through causing war. And that's something that was actually explored in one of his other books called Almost, in which he looks at a family who lived in the days leading up to and during World War II, and showed how the pathos of the family led to the pathos of the nation states that would eventually come into conflict, so that it all started in the home and then spread out like wildfire into the society and became a conflagration on the world stage. Childhood trauma doesn't stay in the home. It's something that's going to spread outward from the home into society, affecting society, ruining society to the point of complete destruction. Now, the peaceful future in which David lives, it was made possible when humanity's need for power and control dissipated. That need, that reactive desire for power and control was dispersed thanks to planet-wide improvements in parenting practices. Better parenting leads to better childhood. Better childhood leads to a better society. Fixing childhood, globally improving the experience of childhood, and individually addressing any traumas of childhood. So basically making childhood a condition that is no longer something to be where you live in fear, but rather you live in love. You live in a state of acceptance and exploration, as opposed to fear and trauma, to globally improve that experience overall. And then if anyone still does experience fear and trauma, to individually address that trauma before it can spread from the child outward into that child's adult behavior and to the rest of society. Basically, fixing childhood actually changes human nature for the better. You wind up with a new, better kind of human being. Now, Staten will be resurrected into this society that is completely antithetical to his views, and he's going to be held in judgment by that society for the devastating deeds of his son. Now, obviously, the son is the primary one to blame. It's not like the son doesn't have free will. The child has free will. It's just that the son's character was necessarily formed by Staten's having parented him, so Staten cannot be held blameless. It's like, if you are abused as a child, you do not have to be a child abuser in turn. You have that choice. However, if you do choose to be an abuser, it's not like the people who abused you were not also to blame. for what you made, for the choice you made. If you had never suffered that abuse, what's the actual chance that you would have become a child abuser? It's very, very low. So, in a way, you have the free will to make your own choices, but you also have to take into consideration the influences under which you grew up, and the people who formed you have some responsibility there. Now, the first big problem with these two chapters of the future, the first big problem is that it is too much too soon. Chapter 1 is basically a sometimes nauseating chock-a-block mix of personal history and warring philosophies. It might be tolerable if we had some sort of narrative structure to tack it onto, and so that when we're going through this fugue state recovery, we know it's happening within a narrative structure, but we're starting from nothing. I mean, even chapter 2, what little we learn there, doesn't really form a narrative. It's just a stub that kind of gives us a little way to wrap up. Now, somebody might object and say, well, doesn't the book description give us context? Because it says, centuries in the future, an old man awakens from cryogenic sleep to face the judgment of a utopian society that barely survived his past abuse of power. However, the book jacket or back cover or web page synopsis of the book, that's not actually part of the book. So you can't rely on that to supply readers with context. This is one of my objections that I had to the comic book I saw. Number one, there were certain elements that were being left out of the comic book, and they weren't being put into the comic book. They were being saved for other kinds of medium. They were either being saved for trading cards, or sometimes you could find it on the website, or you would find it in live streams where the author would talk about the book. But the information that you want the reader to know should all come from the book. If you don't want the reader to know it, that's one thing. But if you do want the reader to know it, it should come from the book. You shouldn't expect the reader to go anywhere else, including to the back cover of the book, because that's not actually part of the work. Now, why should we care about President Staten or the philosophical struggle in which he is mentally engaged? This is not a necessarily likable character. I mean, by the end of it, you kind of get impressed by his charisma and his powerful stance, his charismatic stance. But really, there's no reason to care about this guy. He's somebody who appears kind of out of nowhere, out of this fugue state recovery, and now what? Are we going to be dealing with him, and for what reason? It's just that we're not given any reason to care about this character or where he's going. And for that matter, we don't really have a reason to care about David either, or his qualms about reviving the president. I mean, why should David lives in this great future? We don't know of any conflict that's coming, so what are we supposed to be doing in reference to this book? It just doesn't seem like there is a reason to care about the characters who've been introduced in these two chapters. And the readers are going to, on account of that, are likely going to forget all about chapters 1 and 2 once the real narrative starts in chapter 3. It's foreshadowing there. Why retain all of this info that we've just been core dumped about all of this philosophy and struggle and personal life and all this stuff and David's perspective? Why even remember any of this when it's not addressing any particular conflict? It needs a narrative hook, and that hook is just not there. Well, the solution to this is start with the real narrative. In chapter 3, we're going to see the introduction of a new character, Alice, who is David's daughter. And in the introduction of this character, she's going to, over the next few chapters, be exposed to dangerous situations that require David's intervention. So presumably there's going to come a point in David's handling of Alice's being in danger where President Staten could provide some productive assistance. Staten becomes necessary to help David deal with the danger that Alice is facing. Now, once we understand that David needs Staten to help save his daughter or to accomplish whatever goals might turn up later in the book, then we will have the reason we need to care about Staten and David as well as their internal struggles. Once we have that narrative scaffolding, then dump upon us that stream of consciousness, personal history, philosophy, blah, 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 because then we'll have a reason to care about it. Right now, it's just painful to read. So move chapters 1 and 2 to that point of need in the narrative, and then adjust chapter 2 to incorporate David's personal reasons for waking up Staten. To have David show his tension over the fact that he's waking up this monster because there's a monster that needs slaying, or whatever it is that happens later in the book. David could even use the pro-revival arguments, just the kind of the bland, well, he'd be a great source of historical research. Well, maybe we can learn from him to make sure that humanity doesn't destroy itself again. Let's go ahead and revive him for those reasons. Well, that's all very nice and bland, but what if the real reason David wants him to be awakened is to save his daughter? And if you can get all this other benefit out of him, even better. Maybe he can use those reasons as a way to thwart the negative consensus of the society, which is alarmed at the idea of reviving Staten. Now, the second big problem with the book is, can better parenting actually change human nature? This is a big pill that Stefan Molyneux is asking us to swallow. Because most of human philosophy, and especially conservative philosophy, is based on the fundamental belief that human nature does not change. Human beings who existed thousands of years ago are the human beings who exist today, and the human beings who exist today, that's going to be humanity in the future. Evolution exists, but it doesn't work on such a timeline or a time frame that you're going to see any marked change in human nature in the kind of time that you would want to act on it. You're certainly not going to see it occur in one lifetime. Even if it happened in a dozen lifetimes, that's being very, very optimistic. And moreover, many utopian strategies are grounded in an attempt to create a new humanity. For example, both the Russian Revolution and China's Cultural Revolution, two of the most murderous schemes in human history, were grounded in re-educating humanity with an eye to changing human nature. Just like the Russians, when they implemented the Soviet Union and the communist structure there, they were looking at this dictatorship of the proletariat, during which time they would educate people to have different priorities than humanity has ever had throughout history, which was just a wild scheme, because human beings are human beings by way of evolution that has, over millions of years, influenced humanity towards a certain set of priorities, whether it's life, reproduction, and acquisition of property, things that you can't just educate out of people. And yet, both the Russian Revolution and the Cultural Revolution claimed that they could do that. And when their attempts failed, they basically killed a whole bunch of people, saying that, well, you're in the way. So this is the idea of creating a new humanity. When you're jumping onto that bandwagon, it's not something that's really an attractive thing. Moreover, Molyneux would have us believe that all it takes is teaching people how to parent, using communication, logic, and reason rather than power and discipline. And that's really all we need in order to create this better society. Now that we may need some technological assistance, Bitcoin probably helps. There's other things like medical scans that are going to come into play. And but the thing is basically if you, and this is something he has said before, that if you give him the first 5 years of a child's development, he will give you a good, productive member of society. Because the parenting scheme that he would use is something not the traditional way that most of us were likely raised under in some way, shape, or form. Using some sort of discipline and basically parental power. The idea that, well, you need to do what I say because I provide for you and I'm bigger than you. And inevitably, that's going to give way when the kids themselves get bigger and are able to move away and establish lives for themselves. Now, to be fair, Molyneux's own teenage daughter, Isabella, or Izzy, whom he occasionally partners with on his podcast, she seems to embody the evidence that he's on the right track. I mean, she seems to be a very, very intelligent, very, very spirited, a stand-up girl who he has a great relationship with, and everything that they demonstrate on their show seems to indicate that his style of parenting is one that has produced very, very positive results. Now, one thing that Molyneux seems a little bit disarmed by is the problem of low IQ populations, because it takes a high IQ to parent peacefully. The low IQ generally takes refuge in beatings, spanking, yelling, insults, threats, the various ways of power domination that parenting has been known to be in some way, shape, or form over time. And unless you have a high IQ population to implement the ideas of parenting through logic and reason and through massive amounts of communication to teach a child how that child should be, as opposed to trying to beat that child into how that child should be. I remember there was one time when I was listening to a podcast of his, and I'd love to be able to cite it, but he has hundreds of podcasts available for review online, and there's no way I could track that one down. But he was talking with a caller, and she was saying, well, what about parents who are not high IQ and don't know how to implement these particular strategies? What do you say about them? And he just kind of totally folded, and that was about it. And moreover, he talks a great deal about the science of IQ and how there are various demographic differences in various populations with regard to IQ. And it seems there are times when he holds out little hope that certain populations are going to be able to raise the average IQ to the point where they could adopt these parenting strategies that he is proposing. And if that's the case, I mean, is he really talking about creating a better world for humanity? It almost winds up feeling like he doesn't feel like the low IQ populations of humanity are humanity. And that's kind of a chilling thing to encounter in his work. So the IQ problem is something that it seems like he's been stymied by, and he's even been hypothetically stymied by it in the case of his own offspring, because his daughter happens to be a very high IQ, very intelligent young woman. But he has said himself that he worries how his strategies would have succeeded in the case if he were to have a low IQ child. And so because I mean he would I believe he said that he would have more children if he and his wife were biologically capable of it, but they're up in years and they had difficulties enough conceiving. So this looks like his one daughter is going to be it. But the kind of sense of resignation I got from him on the idea of, if you've got a low IQ child or a low IQ parent, you're just going to wind up throwing up your hands and giving up. I don't really understand how the parenting strategy can be universally applied if you can't take the majority, you would say, or at least, the lower than average portion of humanity into account. So I don't know. It's a big difficulty that arises with this this proposition that better parenting actually can change human nature. Now, what's the solution? Well, the solution is, give it a try. What is the harm going to be if you apply peaceful parenting to raising your own child? Now, what is peaceful parenting? We should give an overview of that, and he does have a book forthcoming on the subject. It's not out yet, to my knowledge. He's since published another novel called The Present, which is sort of a sequel or prequel to The Future. But the Peaceful Parenting book is still in the works. But what I know from having listened to him for a number of years about peaceful parenting, and I'm by no means an expert, so if I get something wrong on this, the fault is all mine, is that peaceful parenting is like treating your child as you would any reasoning moral adult over whom you have no power. If you were dealing with a boss, if you were dealing with a coworker, you would not be threatening that person. You would not be threatening to hit that person. You would definitely never spank that person. You don't have power over somebody who is on the same plane as you, And so peaceful parenting is really treating your child as if it is on the same plane as you, because obviously, inevitably, it will one day be on the same plane as you. You're not going to be bigger than your child forever. This whole idea of, I don't, even if I'm 70 years old, I'll take you out. Yeah, right. For one thing, the child by then will be self sufficient enough that he can just basically move away and leave you in the dust. Um, so the idea being that treat the child now as you expect to treat the child then, because even a child of very, very young age can be a moral agent with whom you can negotiate and speak with logic and reason, and raise in a peaceful way without a challenge or threat. So getting into the specifics of peaceful parenting, we would say there's no verbal abuse. You don't threaten your child. You don't insult your child. You don't even raise your voice in anger to your child, because you wouldn't treat another adult that way. No physical abuse either. No spanking, no timeouts, no confinement, no dragging the child where it refuses to go. You're basically treating the child as if it were a moral agent in its own right, about which you have no particular moral right to aggress against it. You teach through negotiation and not discipline. You teach the child moral reasoning and empathy and deal making and deal keeping. Do that right from the beginning so that the child is aware that there is this structure of reciprocity in human relationships, so that, I do for you, you do for me, and we keep our deals, we keep our word, those kinds of bonds. And when you do that, you won't have to inflict any punishments. Instead, just by honestly and calmly sharing your feelings with your child, whether you're disappointed or angry or grieved by your child's behavior, you will motivate your child to change its behavior, because your child will actually care how you feel about it. And it won't be a fear driven parenting structure. It won't be something like, oh, I have to obey dad or else dad is going to impose bad things upon me. Because do you really want to be known by your child as the person capable of imposing bad things upon your child? Because that's how your child will come to see you. It will be this kind of dichotomous view. Somebody who doesn't really care about me because he's more than willing to inflict pain upon me. No, the way to motivate your child is to get your child to care about you and your own emotional state, and so the child will behave so that the child understands, I'm not being a burden to my parent, and I'm being, kind to my parent the way that my parent is always kind to me. And so that reciprocity and that voluntary relationship is what will continue on and strengthen even into adulthood, so that there's no dichotomous sense of, well, you're a child and now that you're an adult, I still expect you to do things for me, even though I imposed all these bad things on you when I was an adult and you were a child. It's better to have that motivation from love rather than from fear. Now, here's an optimistic view of peaceful parenting. Hey, what if it works? What if it actually produces, like it seems to have produced for Stefan Molyneux himself, what if it produces for you the kind of child that loves you and whom you love, and where you have a good relationship, and where your child instinctively cares about your feelings just as much as you care about its feelings, and you're able to have this mutually beneficial relationship with your child. What if it works? And moreover, what if it works even rippling outward into society, where the society itself becomes more and more healed through the production of children who don't suffer traumatic childhoods, who don't suffer from the slings and arrows of traditional parenting. If you can actually give society a chance to become the kind of utopian world that's going to be outlined in the book, why not take that chance? And then there's, of course, the cynical view. I mean, worst case scenario, there's always forceful parenting, which would be the opposite of peaceful parenting, the traditional style. I mean, but the thing is it's much harder to go from forceful parenting to peaceful parenting than it is from peaceful to forceful. I mean, obviously, losing your temper is probably going to get you from peaceful to forceful, which is why peaceful parenting really does require a commitment. It really does require that you try to kick out the stool from underneath you and say, okay, no matter what, I'm not going to yell at my kid. I'm not going to hit my kid. I'm going to teach my kid morals, and I'm going to teach my kid reciprocity and deal making and deal keeping, and I'm going to do everything that I can to communicate my values to the child, and to have him or her understand my feelings so that my child genuinely cares about me the way that I care about my child, and therefore we can have this relationship. You really need to make that commitment. However, if for some reason that doesn't depend on you, when, I'm not saying that these reasons necessarily exist, but let's say that they do. Let's say that there's just something flat wrong with your kid. I mean, I don't know what that would be, but where you have to go to the forceful parenting style, it's still there. But wouldn't you rather have the kind of parenting style that if you ever had to go out on a limb and use force, you can, but as far as you are committed to, insofar as it depends on you, peacefully raising your child, you do so. It's way, way harder to go in the other direction. If you start out a yelling, a spanking, a disciplining, a punishing parent, then you kind of have to go and apologize to the child for how you treated it if you're going to start treating it in a peaceful manner from then on, because you are basically trying to repent of your prior behavior. And if you don't do that, your child is just going to see you as inconsistent. Your child has to know that you've changed your mind. You really have had a change of heart on parenting, and that you're going to go to this peaceful structure. And that's very that's very hard, very humbling to do. You may as well start in the other direction. Start at the peaceful side, and then, absolute worst case scenario, you'll switch over to the more traditional style. But that's only if this peaceful parenting doesn't work. And who's to say that maybe there's not something deficient in the way that you're applying peaceful parenting such that it doesn't work. So there needs to be also this network of people who are aware of what peaceful parenting is. Of course, the book that's forthcoming from Stefan Molyneux will do a lot towards showing people how to peacefully parent, and that will probably be the best boon that people can get on that, straight from the horse's mouth. So, anyway, that is my recapitulation of the ideas in Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 of The Future by Stefan Molyneux. The next video in the sequence of this playlist is actually one that I've done prior to this playlist. It's called Why Your Book Needs an Editor, so that when we go into Chapter 3, which is where the real narrative of the story starts, I noticed a bunch of structural flaws with the very beginning of the chapter, where I felt like the beginning of the chapter needed a rewrite. And so I went ahead and did this rewrite. And so please do watch this as your next video in the playlist, and then from there I will be linking that into the next video in the sequence, where I actually take the plot and events of Chapter 3 and onward and start analyzing those. So this next video is going to be more on the technical structure of the first page or so of Chapter 3, which is the start of the actual narrative, where I really feel like the book should begin. And then I will be getting into the concepts and the events of those chapters, and we'll be dealing with those in somewhat rapid succession. So please do join me for that next video and the videos after. This has been my review of Chapters 1 and 2 of The Future. I'm Mike Partika. Please do subscribe. You can also hit me up on Gab for social media. Find my videos on YouTube, BitChute, and Rumble. Thank you for watching. Please do subscribe so you can continue getting notified of future videos, and I will talk to you later.